So a mytheme which is very effective in its use across different contexts. It travels, as Beale says, across media ecologies. Also, like the numerous biblical commentators of all ages, we understand the vertiginous verticality of the pit as an invitation to probe ethical boundaries. So we might say that actually the verticality of the pit, in a sense, resists the idea of, the linearity of the apocalyptic tradition, time coming to an end, the linearity or the sequentiality signaled by the seals, by the trumpets. The pit is, as it were, a sort of a stumbling stone in the apocalyptic narrative. A quick comparison across 6 centuries, largely focusing on Italy, I hope, exemplify this semantic complexity and also the wealth of the pit, of the abisso, of the pozzo dell'abisso as a spatial and ethical metaphor. So, for example, in the 13th century, we have the Franciscan theologian and physician Arnold of Villanova, who evoked Revelation 9, and particularly the image of the falling star in his critique of Thomas Aquinas, who, according to Arnold, had abandoned divine truth for the cloudy, worldly, or perhaps sort of sub-worldly realms of political doctrine. But then you also have, Osorius, for example, Jesuit writing in the late 16th century, who identifies the falling star with Martin Luther. His fellow Jesuit, the Italian Cardinal Roberto Bellarmino, who was one of the influential voices of the Counter-Reformation, described Luther as the beast from the pit. Moving beyond the Italian context, you have the angel Abaddon, Apollyon in Milton's Paradise Lost, and also in the poetry of William Coleridge, who offers his own not very etymologically correct pun when he uses this idea of the bottomless pit in a joke about the surname of the then Prime Minister of England, William Pitt. Pitt with a double T in this case. Right? So this is also sort of etymology of sorts, I guess. Before I hand over to Stefano, just to sort of summarize this first part, we are interested in the way in which apocalyptic imagery moves beyond its original context. This is according to Habermas, this is a defining feature of what he calls in his discourse on the occasion of the Friedenspreis, he calls the post-secular age. So we're interested in these forms of actualization. Actualization means, as defined by Judith Kovacs and Christopher Rowland, means that biblical tropes, or specifically apocalyptic tropes, are juxtaposed or blended with the interpreter's own circumstances. Actualization does not necessarily presuppose religious belief, but it always foregrounds. That's the argument, and that's where Stefano's contribution, I think, will sort of fit very well. It always foregrounds ethical orientation, right? We find this in the secular doomsday literature of the atomic age, in sci-fi, in experimental art, in the writings of authors like Manganelli, but also in the emerging canon of climate fiction, which is also very frequently steeped in the language and symbolism of John of Patmos. So you have a phenomenon, on the one hand, which Warren Wagar described. Warren Wagar was one of the first people to study apocalypse literature as a secular phenomenon, and he said eschatology in the modern context is, he calls it disaster in the highest order of magnitude, and creative act of the secular imagination. But on the other hand, you really have this sort of kind of continuity with the biblical precursors, because both secular narratives and biblical apocalyptic narratives share this orientation towards the future, which is always an ethical orientation. So they share this expectation that catastrophe will reveal ethical boundaries, whether catastrophe is imagined as a cataclysm or in the form of progressive, planetary, slow violence. Again, I quote the historian Bernard McGinn, and theologian, who says, what is distinctive about the apocalyptic legend as compared with other forms of legends is their location not in the past, but ethically in the future. And with this, I would hand over to Stefano, please.
Thank you, Florian, and thanks to all the organizers. I'm going to continue in the path traced by Florian, starting from the polyphony of the bottomless pit. And then I hope that we have the opportunity to discuss this all together. I'm also going to share my screen because I also have some quotations. Just get to the slide. So the polyphony of the bottomless pit reflects the ambivalence of the figure of the abyss in Western culture. As Florian and I have argued, when we consider the conceptual history of the abyss and its relation to the human condition, two semantic fields stand out from the multitude of meanings that the abyss has gained in Western culture. We believe that the first one is the abyss as a metaphor and concrete manifestation of evil. And the second is the abyss as a figure that represents the ambivalence of the human and the dangers intrinsic to the navigation of the polis and of life itself. So in what follows, I'm going to first provide a brief overview of these two strands, and I'm going to connect the first one to Primo Levi's If He's a Man, Primo Levi's Auschwitz testimony, and the second strand to the ancient motto Naufragium feci, bene navigare. So the second chapter of If He's a Man, Se questo un uomo, Levi's Auschwitz testimony, published for the first time in 1947 and then in 1958 in a revised edition, is entitled On the Bottom, Sul Fondo. In it, Levi recounts his arrival and his first days in the camp, detailing the process of dehumanization to which each happening was subjected. The metaphor that Levi chooses to describe the process of demolition of a man is that of the downward journey towards the bottom. In Italian, in viaggio all'ingiù, verso il fondo. The abyss, or in Levi's words, the bottom, emerges then as a structuring image of the evil of Auschwitz. Indeed, after narrating the journey in the cattle trains, the entrance in the camp, the selection of the newly arrived prisoners on the train platform, and the humiliations inflicted by the SS and the camp guards, Levi conceptualizes the condition in which he has fallen through terms and concepts that belong to the semantic field of the abyss. And I'm going to read the passage that we have here on the screen. For the first time, we became aware that our language lacks words to express this offense, the demolition of a man. In a moment, with almost prophetic intuition, the reality was revealed to us. We had reached the bottom. It is not possible to sink lower than this. No human condition is more miserable than this, nor could it be consideredly so. So this idea of going towards the bottom, reaching the bottom, reverberates throughout the book, but is particularly prominent in this chapter, which is called On the Bottom, sul fondo. And I would say that Levi's use of the concept of the bottom and of orientational metaphors and expressions, such as la notte gli inghiottì, andiamo tutti giù, giacere sul fondo, the night swallowed them up, we're all down to lie on the bottom, exemplifies how the abyss has often been used to represent a condition of extreme destitution, degradation, or pure evil. As Lakoff and Johnson argue in Metaphors with Levi, the polar opposition up and down frequently conveys the opposition between good and bad. Going up as we see many expressions in English and I guess in other languages, is typically associated with things getting better, while down here, low generally denote the worsening of someone's condition. Within this context, the abyss or the bottom stand for the lowest condition ever possible, for something that is not just bad, but rather the epitome of evil. Special metaphors intersect here with cultural tropes, where the abyss is often associated with hell. The most notable example is Dante's Inferno, which profoundly influenced Levi's representation of Auschwitz. Dante depicts hell as 9 concentric circles, as we can all see from the image here, of torment located within the earth. And in his journey, Dante descends into lower circles, and this descent signals a gradual increase in wickedness, culminating at the center of the earth, which you can see there at the bottom, where Dante locates Satan as a figure of extreme evil. So the association between the abyss and evil, I think we can also find this, and it's also tested by the Latin etymology of evil. As we all know, the Latin word for evil is malum, which in Latin has different meanings: evil, disaster, misfortune, calamity, disgrace, harm, and many secondary meanings. As the philosopher Massimo Cacciari has pointed out in a lecture on evil, if we consider the comparative peius and superlative pessimus of this adjective malus, we notice that they are related to pessum, to the bottom, to the lowest part, downwards, and thus to a state of fallenness. Pessumire, indeed, in Latin, means to go ruin, to sink, to be ruined or destroyed. The association between the abyss and evil, however, is not just a metaphor. Going down, sinking, falling are verbs that denote the complete reality of death. Unfortunately, and shamefully for us Europeans, I would say, this is often the case for the migrants that attempt to cross the Mediterranean in precarious boats. For them, the abyss is both a tangible threat and a symbol of Europe's moral crisis. The appearance of many migrants in the depths of the disappearance of many migrants in the depths of the sea uncannily echoes the depths in the Black Atlantic during the slave trade. And here I want to make a connection with The Poetics of Relation by Edouard Glissant, where the Martinican writer recalls the abyss as a metaphor and as a deadly reality. What is terrifying partakes of the abyss, 3 times linked in the unknown. First, the time you fell into the belly, the time you fell into the belly of the boat. For in your poetic vision, a boat has no belly. A boat does not swallow up, does not devour. A boat is steered by open skies. Yet the belly of this boat dissolves you, precipitates you into an unknown world from which you cry out. This boat is a womb abyss. It generates the clamor of your protest. It also produces all the cunning unanimity. Although you are alone in this suffering, you share in the unknown with others whom you have yet to know. This boat is a womb, a matrix, yet it expels you. This boat, pregnant with as many dead as living under a sentence of death. Moving now to the second strand, the abyss as a figure that represents the ambivalence of the human, I would like to conclude the shared paper by outlining a shipwreck that is quite different from the one evoked by Glissant. To open some questions on the potential ambivalence of the abyss, which I hope we will have the opportunity of discussing together later, I want to recall an ancient motto that's always been dear to me. Naufragium feci, bene navigare. As Hans Blumenberg shows in Shipwreck the Spectator, humans have sought to grasp the movement of their existence, above all through the metaphor of the perilous sea voyage. As the reverberations of the Greek idea of the Kybernetes show, Navigation is a widespread metaphor for politics, philosophy, and life itself. It's really like, especially in ancient Greek culture, the idea of navigating is really a recurring metaphor that is used as a matter of philosophy, of existence, of life itself, and also of the navigation of politics, how we should govern the polis. The motto "Naufragium feci bene navigavi" was first mentioned by Diogenes Laertius, but we found multiple versions of it throughout European culture. To cite a couple of examples from the Italian context, I will recall Leopardi's Dolce Naufragar and Ungaretti's Allegria di Naufragi. But we can find reference to it also in Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and many other authors. So how can we interpret the seeming contradictoriness of this motto? I would say that this motto calls into question the idea that shipwrecking is the sign of a bad navigation. On the contrary, there is a mutual implication between good navigation and shipwrecking. And this is made explicit by Erasmus in the Adagium 1878. Nunc bene navigavi, cum naufragium feci. So here Erasmus adds some little modifications to the Latin translation of Diogenes Laertius, and we could translate this motto as, now that I shipwreck, my navigation has gone well, or since I have shipwrecked, I can now say that I have navigated well. So Erasmus makes even more explicit that shipwrecking, or if you like, the experience of the abyss, in this sensu lato understanding of the abyss, is not in contrast with navigation, but rather is a necessary passage, something without which we cannot have a full and proper navigation. To put it differently, only when we have made the experience of shipwrecking, we can claim to have navigated well. On the one hand, shipwrecking is an enriching experience. Shipwrecking, of course, understood in metaphorical terms. A possibility that gives meaning to every metaphorical navigation. On the other hand, in our human existence, it is impossible to navigate without ever shipwrecking. Now, in our finite, imperfect world, shipwrecking is ultimately unavoidable. So I'd like to conclude with some questions. Is the abyss necessarily the sign of evil, or is it possible to reconceive it as something that enriches our existence? If in our finite existence we cannot access any full salvation, is the abyss an element structural to every good navigation? Or is the negativity of the abyss too extreme to be subsumed in a sort of Hegelian heaven within something positive? We look forward to discussing the polyphony and ambivalence of the abyss with all of you, and we thank all of you for your attention.
Yes, we are already a bit over the time, so we'll just take maybe one or two quick questions. Is there anyone? Maybe then I'll start. I was wondering, or I found that remarkable at your introductory quotation, actually what Florian already said, but maybe you can both also react to that, that there was this dimension of the abyss as an access to a non-space. So I don't know whether I understood that correctly, but for me that means a little bit that the abyss can serve as a place of transformation. Yeah, so this getting into another dimension. We had that already in the first panel at several occasions. Can you, I mean, there were many different aspects, of course, in what you said, but this was one aspect that I would invite you to maybe react to.
Shall I go first, Stefano? Or yeah. Apologies for being a bit over. We actually timed it, but I mean, obviously, when you do it in real life, it always takes a bit longer. This is a really good point, Matt. I think what we try, I'd be interested to personally find it very interesting to explore this. What we tried to convey, I think, was really this sense of a vertigo that we felt when we were sort of comparing our readings and our associations, and how we, you know, I think it's fascinating to think of it as a transformative space, but we certainly felt that it was a kind of sort of, you know, that's why we went on and on about the sort of polysemy of the signifier, because we just couldn't really, I mean, we felt that the ethical dimension was very central. I think Stefano in the end conveyed a kind of sort of hope that it could be a transformative space. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure. I'd love to discuss this more.
All right, thank you.
Can I come back to that point, Marco?
Sure, James, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm really in tune with the three speakers, Marco and Stefano and Florian here. I feel much more comfortable with this discussion. Why? Because I think it's clear that Marco is looking for a transformative space. But that space is a non-space, and it's true that you get into difficulties in English when you start speaking about the bottom or bottomless pit. There's a bottom or there's not a bottom. It's a space or it's not a space. It's a paradoxical space. So we're very much into the imagination. We're into the imagination, and we're into the imagination as a real space, but a transcendental spiritual space, the space of God, the space beyond space and the space beyond time. What I found fascinating in the paper, there were many points, I really enjoyed the paper, and I love Marco's question, but what I found really interesting was that Italians responding to pit and bottomless pit, and they take us into the romantic poems. This is fascinating for me. But also, how does Florian and Stefano say, oh yeah, but we're actually in the Mediterranean? Because I just cannot feel that, cannot understand that, I don't have that sensibility. And for you, there is an abyss, an abgrund or an abyss or something, which is material and physical and belonging to the earth on one's hand, but it can also be transformed by polysemy to the sea, but the Mediterranean, which is the space between in this transition. So these ideas of transmission, transformation seem to me deeply exciting and difficult for me as an English person to think in terms, but obviously you're thinking in terms of English and in Italian, and you're making quite a lot of interesting points there, so thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Do you want to react, Florian or Stefano?
Stefano.
Thanks, James, for the question. I would say that when we were thinking of the abyss, we noticed basically, well, there was a first two strands. One was the material abyss, so the real abyss, and there we can talk of the Mediterranean or the Black Atlantic, if you like. And then there is a metaphorical abyss. And then within the metaphorical abyss, there is like it branches out in two directions again. One is the abyss as extreme sign of negativity, and we can see that, for example, in the part that was in my part of paper with Manganelli, they use the idea of the in fondo something you can sink lower than that. But this is one branch of the metaphorical abyss. The other branch is the abyss as a sign of ambivalence. And there, I think, going back to Marco's question, is where transformation could come from. If the abyss is a sign of ambivalence, then reaching the abyss is not a condition of no return, but it's actually something structural to life and to the progress of life. So I think here is also connected to some kind of idea of the tragic. Indeed, for example, Nietzsche goes back to this idea of naufragio e navigare as well. Schopenhauer goes back to it. Leopardi goes back to it. Di Baldoni. So it really kind of reverberates throughout the centuries, and is the idea that shipwrecking in the metaphorical sense is really not an absolute negative condition, but it's something structural to good navigation. Without shipwrecking, you couldn't have a good navigation.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. As I said, there were so many different things. I could ask lots of questions still. I also found it very nice, this reference. I wasn't aware of Erasmus having used this metaphor of the shipwreck, yeah, so which of course in Leopardi is so beautifully put, yeah. How does he phrase it? Il naufragame dolce in questo mare, yeah,
yes.
so all this yeah, this idea of a sweet shipwreck, yeah. So, yeah, a desire in shipwrecking, in going into the abyss. Yeah, that seems to be something really with a comparative dimension and not just in one culture. So I think there are already lots of things coming together somehow, and we'll have at the end also one more general round discussion with all of us where we should keep those points in mind and then try to wrap it all up at the end. But now we have to get to the second paper. Thank you very much, Stefano and Florian. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.